bombings, the Madrid bombings, and thank God the transatlantic conspiracy was foiled in time. But in battling terrorism, we also believe that it's very important to support the democratic process, to support the empowerment of the people, to enable the people of the country to have the ability to stand up for their own rights and to face the militants and the extremists who would not only claim victims abroad, but who would destabilize Pakistan itself, pitting one sect against another sect, creating blood and violence and mayhem in our streets. I may also add that history shows us that a democratic Pakistan, which leads to the participation of the people of Pakistan from Khyber to Karachi, can bring an end to violence and to chaos. I say this because after the Soviets withdrew in 1989, the Pakistan People's Party government was made a victim of the military hardliners who had supported the Afghan Mujahideen in fighting the Soviets. They had empowered the most radical and extremist groups amongst the Afghan Mujahideen. And once the Afghan Mujahideen defeated the Soviets, they then started another war, and our government was the victim of that war. Because our government did not want violence. Our government wanted peace and stability. Our government wanted peace and stability within Pakistan, between our provinces. We wanted peace and stability with a new government in Afghanistan. We wanted peace and stability with India, our large neighbor on our other side. And these elements did not want peace. We wanted the peace and the unity of the larger Muslim world. We did not want the Muslim world divided on lines of religion or Sunni versus Shia, as we now often see on the television, that in Najaf a Sunni group has killed somebody who's a Shia, or a Shia group has killed somebody in the Sunni heartland in and about Baghdad. We wanted to see unity within the Muslim world. We wanted to see unity and peace in the larger world community. And we really thought with the fall of the Berlin Wall that a better world beckoned all of us, irrespective of our race, our religion, our color, or our creed. But it was not to be so. And the government of the Pakistan People's Party, or should I say the democratic government, was the first target. Because during those days I first heard the name Osama bin Laden when he gave $10 million to overthrow the PPP government through a vote of no confidence. That vote was defeated. But Osama bin Laden in those days had left Pakistan. He had left Afghanistan. He had gone back to Saudi Arabia. He was called back by the hardliners and the militants who told him that the war is still not over. We now have to battle for Islam. We now have to battle against the election of a woman prime minister, because a woman has usurped a man's place in the second largest Muslim country in the world. And so we saw the birth of a new politics, the birth of a politics where a particular group interpreting religion in a particular manner chose to bring about a political transformation. The PPP government was overthrown in 1990, and I was very grateful to President Bush 41 for the support he gave to the PPP government, which I've already mentioned. But after the PPP government was overthrown in 1990, and it was overthrown when world attention was diverted by the events in Iraq, Iraq and Kuwait, where Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. So while world attention was turned away, the establishment moved against democracy in Pakistan. That was in August 1990. 2nd August 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and 6th August 1990, the establishment overthrew democracy in Pakistan using the presidential powers. And it was after that the war against terrorism externally started. Because many people think the war against terrorism started on 9/11. But for those of us who have battled the militants and the extremists and have seen terrorism up front, up face, we know that it started long before. We know it started with the first attack on the World Trade Centers, which took place in 1991. We know it continued with the attacks on the American embassies in Africa, and it continued with the attacks on the coal ship. There were attacks in India. The Bombay blasts or the Mumbai blasts took place at that time. And Pakistan was on the brink of being declared a terrorist state. And when Pakistan was on the brink of being declared a terrorist state, those of us who love our country, which is the majority of our people, or almost all of our people, although we express our love in different ways perhaps, or express it politically in different ways, we were very fearful for the consequences. Well, the consequences we saw when the Taliban harbored terrorists what happened to Afghanistan. So we were very concerned. And it was at that time that Pakistan People's Party was re-elected to power. And if you look at the re-election of the People's Party in 1993, there was no major terrorist attack on any target internationally or even in mainland India at that time. Which is why I say that the pattern of terrorism correlates to the pattern of the rise and the fall of democracy in Pakistan. And if terrorism is to be combated, that fight has to begin in Islamabad. I don't say that it is only Islamabad, but I say it has to begin in Islamabad. And perhaps if we look and see that every major terrorist attacks that takes place, the steps somehow lead back to Islamabad. Although our people are not terrorists, although our people oppose terrorism, but somehow dictatorship has given birth to a society which has enabled lawless groups to entrench themselves. And because military dictatorships do not have the support of the people, they do not have their eyes and ears on the ground. A democratic government has its eyes and ears on the ground because every party worker from the Khyber to Karachi has an interest in making that government survive. Every voter who has elected that government has an interest in making that government survive. So it pains us when we as Pakistanis see that the entire concentration is against the moderate forces, which enables the other organized groups to flourish. And we have seen that whenever a major terrorist attack takes place, unfortunately, the track leads back to Islamabad. Whether it is the shoe bomber, the track leads back to Islamabad. Whether it is the CEO of Al-Qaeda, that is Khalid Sheikh, the track leads back to Islamabad and he's caught in a house in Islamabad. Whether it is the third most important leader of Al-Qaeda, Abu Zubaydah, the track leads back and he is caught in a house in Faisalabad. Whether it is the 7/7 bombings, the track leads back and Shafqat Tanveer has been visiting Islamabad. And we Pakistanis don't like it because we are not party to it. We do not want this terrorism to survive. We do not want terrorists to come and use our soil for their plots, but yet we get blamed. And when a person with a Pakistani passport goes to an airport, he is looked at with suspicion. And everywhere across the world, now we see a greater suspicion of Pakistanis, and we see a greater suspicion of Muslims. And that makes us, who are part of the Muslim community, feel besieged. It makes us also defensive, because suddenly we see that while respect is shown for people's sexual preferences, and nobody would make fun of people who are homosexuals, or respect is shown for gender rights, and nobody would make fun of women taking part about working women, that same kind of respect we feel is not being shown to us when cartoons like the Danish cartoon are printed, or when the Pope recollects an ancient medieval king who spoke unkindly about the Prophet of Islam. So each Pakistani and each Muslim suddenly feels that we are under scrutiny. But we ask that where does this whole issue spring from? It doesn't spring from what Pakistanis want. It doesn't spring from what could happen in Pakistan if there was democracy. So if we can look back in history and if we can see the correlation between the acts of terrorism and the undemocratic periods during the which they occurred, then we will appreciate that if terrorism has to be fought, it has to begin with democracy in Pakistan. Democracy in Afghanistan is important.